All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to an episode of Dear Dr. Fantasy. And it is my privilege and honor to have as my very special guest today, Matt. And I will, of course, have a link to his channel in the description, but I suspect that most of you know who Matt is. He's been making a big splash here on BookTube with a very exciting channel focused on fantasy. And I think that he is doing some really cool things. So definitely, if you're not familiar with it yet, this is a channel to check out. But Matt, how are you? And thank you for being here.
I'm doing great. Yeah. Only been up for about half an hour, but the day is going well. Life is good. Having fun on this long weekend, and yeah, everything's going awesome.
Well, I really appreciate you being here. It's very early where you are, a little later where I am, so much appreciated. And it's always fun to talk fantasy. And this is our first time being in a discussion together, so hopefully first of many. Yeah, I meant what I said too, because I really do feel like you're doing some exciting things on your channel. And obviously your viewers are very dedicated. I can see that when you review a book, which is unusual these days on BookTube, when you review a book, you get a lot of views on your reviews. That is not everyone can say that. Reviews are not well watched, at least in the short term.
Yeah.
On BookTube. So what's your secret? How do you get so many people to watch your reviews, Matt?
I don't know, Philip. I suspect the answer, like most answers to things, is complicated. And there's probably a lot of different factors to it. I think maybe something is I do a lot of reviews. And so I cultivate an audience, I think, that expects that sort of material. I mean, so I read, I don't know, 110, 120 books a year, almost all fantasy, and then I review them all. And so I have a video coming out, every 2 to 3 days. And so I think people that watch my channel know that that's what my content is. And so you don't usually hit subscribe unless that's what you want to see. I also do kind of a different format than a lot of people. And so it becomes, I'm kind of critical of myself, and where my reviews aren't like as technically good as almost anybody else, because I don't script anything. I just do everything without any cuts ever. And so it's a very raw kind of review.
You're shooting from the hip there.
Yeah, and it's a reaction. So I finished my book. I hit record a few minutes before I finish the book, and then I finish it and just start talking. And maybe there's an audience out there that likes that kind of thing, and then wants to get more of it.
Yeah, I think there's a genuineness to your reviews, probably, that people appreciate, that when they hear you talking about a book, they can rely on the fact that this is your genuine reaction to it, and it shows when you're talking about the book. So maybe that's something that people appreciate, the fact that it is unscripted and seems just so genuine. So maybe that's one aspect of it. But you seem very consistent as well, and I think that is a big thing. That is an important quality to have for a YouTube channel. I think is one of the qualities anyway, is consistency. So that's definitely a big plus. Yeah, you're connecting with a lot of people, which is wonderful. So obviously fantasy is a passion of yours. That's fair to say if you're reading 120 books a year, and most of them are fantasy. How did well, let's start with my standard question for you. And we have a specific series that we have in common that we love, and we're going to talk about later. Malazan. And among others, I've noticed a few other series on your channel that you've been reading that I also love. But Malazan is one that we both are like, I think it's both of us, it's our favorite of all time.
Yeah, definitely.
We're definitely have to talk Malazan, but I do want to get a sense of your journey as a reader and what led to you becoming a booktuber. In other words, going on the premise that you are what you read, at least in some way or other. What have been some of the most formative stories for you over the years, going all the way back to when you were a young'un and up to today? What are some of the important series for you as you formed your channel around them?
Yeah. So I started reading, very young. My mom really pushed reading and the passion for reading to me. I mean, I always saw her reading around the house, reading for before bed, and so it was something that I wanted to emulate. And so she for whatever reason found out as a kid that my passion for reading at a young age was more fantasy type books, which I suspect is true for a lot of kids, because they're fun. And so she got me into this Animorphs series as a kid, which was just about these kids that found these powers where they could turn into different animals for a period of time, and had to fight off this like alien invasion. And there was dozens and dozens of books, and so I was just addicted to them at the Scholastic Book Fair, and if I could get my hands on them. And then I was really addicted as a kid to the Redwall series by Brian Jacques, and so those were my big reads as a kid, with a lot of Goosebumps as well. But as I got older, when I started getting into middle school and high school, I stopped reading for passion, because I was reading so much for school that it kind of zapped out my interest in reading. And in college especially, I wanted to do other things than just reading, and I was doing so much reading for school. And it wasn't until I graduated that I got back into it. And what pulled me back into it was the Game of Thrones TV show. And so I watched the first episode when it came out, and I said, this is amazing. I'm not going to watch anymore. Let me go read this series. And I became addicted to it. I read it multiple times. I thought it was the best and only fantasy series out there.
The Song of Ice and Fire. I mean, it's a good one. Yeah.
But I was ignorant to the greater fantasy world. And so I just really got into it. And then it kind of waned for a little bit, after I read it for a bunch, and I became disillusioned with getting another book.
Yeah. That's unfortunate.
I remember playing this video game, Total War Warhammer, and it's like a strategy game based on like fantasy characters. And as I was playing it, I was really, putting in a lot of hours into it. And I thought, there's books out there for this. I should get into them. And right before I bought one, I thought, I'm an analytical guy. Why would I just go randomly buy a book when I could just go research what the best fantasy books are? And I looked up this thread on Reddit for the top fantasy poll, and I said, let me start at the top. And so I went and read Stormlight Archive, and loved it. And then I just started working my way down, and that I got into Mistborn and Malazan and Gentleman Bastards and King Killer Chronicle, and just all the top hits. And
according to the Reddit users.
Yeah. And I just got really addicted to it, and it became part of my life, where I just kind of upped my reading over time, and that kind of started substituting TV for me in my leisure time. And so now for the past couple of years, I'm at a point where I kind of just consistently read the same amount every day. And
you have a set number of pages you prefer to read every day? Is that how you
I'm more like a time thing. Like if I'm reading something like Malazan, I slow down.
Same here. Yeah.
If I'm reading a more leisurely read, I don't really have to pay close attention, set, single POV kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It speeds up. And that's where I am now.
That's awesome. That's a great story. You would be surprised how many people I've talked to for this particular show who have said, I stopped reading at some point in high school and college, and then at some point in my 20s, there's usually some catalyst, something happens, and then they get back into reading. And it's actually the vast majority of people I've talked to who've answered this question have had a similar experience, where that something is always different, though, whatever it is that brings them back into reading. That's always unique. But the pattern is, people stop reading somewhere for pleasure, at least, in the latter years of high school, college, usually somewhere around there, and then come back to it. And I love hearing about why the person comes back to reading. That's one of the best parts of the narrative. And we all have that thing, and a lot of us will have that series. In your case, A Song of Ice and Fire. rekindled this love of storytelling and everything. And that's a great one, by the way. And I personally, I have made peace with the idea that I might not ever read another installment in that
Yeah.
series. And I will never regret having read that series. I've read every book in the series at least twice. The first book I've read at least 5 times
Mhm.
because I actually taught it in my fantasy novels course for a number of years. And I will never regret having read those books because George R.R. Martin is just a very talented writer. I really enjoy his stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that perspective. It's one I have as well. And it makes me sad that a lot of people have this idea that I can't read a series until it's finished. And
Yeah, yeah,
it ruins the idea, I think, that the journey is the fun. It's not the ending. And I mean, there's a reason so many people will tell you that A Storm of Swords is their favorite book
yeah,
of all time, knowing that there's no ending. It's just, I think people sometimes need to get rid of this idea that, this is the exact way that I have to read a book and a
yeah,
series to be able to enjoy it.
yeah. I
And
love the way you put that. Yeah, it's really more about the experience, the journey. Yeah,
and I also think, based on kind of what you were saying before about so many people saying that they lost their interest in reading, I found that with a lot of my friends, and they never rekindled it again. I
yes,
try to do it myself, and it makes me think, there's some problem out there with the way we teach reading in school, where
yeah.
it zaps the fun out of it at some point. And I don't know the answer, but it feels like there's got to be something out there that allows children to be taught while also maintaining that love. And I don't know, there's just something missing out there.
Well, I would submit to you that, well, of course I'm biased, but we're biased. We are lovers of fantasy. But and I would submit to you that the course that I teach, fantasy novels, my students love that class.
Yeah.
And sometimes people are like, "What? You can study fantasy in college?" And I would submit to you that instead of some of the older classics, which I do love and respect, but I think that maybe it's time for high school teachers to consider asking their students to read more fantasy rather than, say, Moby Dick or The
Mhm.
Great Gatsby or whatever. I think, hey, you might have more enthusiastic readers in high school if you allow them to read books that still have a lot of meat. They still have a lot of important themes that they wrestle with that are relevant to our lives, but are books that will hook those students more easily, that
Yeah.
actually speak to them in a voice that resonates more with these younger people. Because I promise you that a lot of students would probably feel differently about reading if they were able to read the books that excite them more. And I think that a lot of people would respond like, "Oh no, that's just genre fiction. That's just fluff. That's just escapism." Blah blah blah. Well, I don't think there's anything wrong with escaping, first of all, but secondly, I think that's a misconception that fantasy is devoid of deep, thematic, important storytelling. In fact, there's a ton of very important storytelling that you can find in fantasy. And some of it is, yes, some of it leans more toward just entertainment. And there's nothing wrong with that either, by the way. There's room for everything in the genre. That's one of the things that makes it a great genre. But do you agree? Do you think that fantasy should be taught in middle school and high school as enriching as a starting point for discussions about the human experience?
I absolutely. I mean, and I might even go a step further and to say that I would, if I was leader of the country and the leader had these sort of decision making skill abilities, which I don't think they have.
No.
I'd say let kids read what they want.
Uh-huh.
Whatever it is, and it doesn't have to be fantasy, but
Right.
it works for me. But if horror is more your thing, if romance is more your thing, whatever it may be,
Yeah.
there's value in reading and being into that throughout your life, and getting that hook in is really important. I mean, but to specifically answer your question, I find fantasy to be, and obviously I'm biased, but I've become a much better person by reading fantasy. That
Yep.
my compassion for the world and seeing everybody's perspectives and just being a good dad. And I feel like I've learned a lot of life skills through my passion for reading fantasy books, which is a very strange thing, I think, for people to hear when they're not into the genre, but it's very true. And I'm very thankful for the lessons it's taught me in life that I thoroughly would not have learned outside of it.
I completely agree. I think it's one of the important functions of storytelling is indeed learning empathy, is learning how to understand people who are different from yourself, but also finding a bit of yourself in those people, which is a pretty amazing thing. And I think it does affect us in our daily lives, in our lives outside of stories, if you will, that it can help you a lot to give you some clarity about life, to emerge from that story, having gone on that journey vicariously, at least with those characters. You come back to your mundane life with a sense of, I think, meaning sometimes. And that can be very empowering and can be very helpful for yourself and for your relationships and a lot of things. So yeah, vital stuff. And I agree, we should be listening to kids when we think about what we want them to read, what do they enjoy, what speaks to them, rather than trying to force something,
Yeah.
And I'm not saying ditch all the classics either. They are important and there's a place for them. But I do think that, I teach classics. I literally teach a course called English Classics, okay, which includes medieval, Renaissance literature. It's a survey course all the way up to the 18th century. And whenever I teach this class, I also have to do a lot of history in order to give students context, because a lot of times it's very helpful to understand the mindset, say, of the 8th century England, the Anglo-Saxons. It's different from our own in some important respects. There are certain themes, like, they're wrestling with mortality, that sort of thing. That's going to span across every human era. But there are certain modes of storytelling. There's certain world views that need some context. You have to do some explaining in order for the reader to get the most out of the experience. Because a lot of times people will try to read Beowulf and they're like, what is this? This doesn't, it doesn't proceed chronologically. There are big gaps, and there are all these side stories and all this stuff, and they're like, this isn't, if you're like, say, you've only read a lot of modern fantasy, you're going to be completely baffled by Beowulf. So you have to spend some time, I think, giving that context in order for the experience to be as enriching as it can possibly be. But which is one reason why I think I wish everyone would wait to teach Beowulf until at least later years of high school, if not college.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's pretty cool to think that we could. I do see more and more in higher education an acceptance of genre fiction as having the capacity to. There are stories within horror, within science fiction, within romance, within fantasy, et cetera, that you can use to study and learn about the human experience, and that's fantastic. I think Malazan would be a great candidate, by the way. I mean, that would be a series that I've said many times, people can and have written dissertations on Malazan. There's so much going on there, so much about the human experience. So let's talk about Malazan for a bit here.
Yeah.
You obviously, when you were discovering all the great series and using the Reddit list and everything, Malazan was on that list somewhere. I hope in the top 10. I don't know what the Reddit list.
I think it was closer to 10 than 1, but it was definitely on there.
Okay. So what is it about Malazan that spoke so much to you that it is your favorite series of all time? You and I also, Crippled God, I believe, is your favorite book.
It is, yeah.
Yep, same here. So what is it about the series that, and we're not doing spoilers, obviously, but
yeah,
what is it about the series that spoke so to you?
So many things. starting with Steven Erikson, the writer. You know, I don't know if he's the greatest technical writer out there, but he's certainly the one that speaks the most to me.
Yeah.
You know, the ability to write somehow accessible and deeply complex is this wonderful blend that I've never really been able to come across again. I mean, it's so easily understandable, but speaks to you, and the blending in of the philosophy throughout the book without being heavy-handed. I mean, everything feels like it's this amazing blend that I just can't come across again. And the complexity to it, not to say that it's too complex, but it's wonderful in the way that it makes you think constantly. The deep level of amount of different varying characters, hundreds, that all feel so different from each other and unique. You know, this ability to drop you into a story and not have to spend a bunch of time telling you about the world and just let you experience it for the first time, along with a lot of these characters who are experiencing new things for the first time, is refreshing. I mean, I've read so many fantasy stories that, and I love many of them, that do a lot of explaining without a lot of showing. And Erikson is relentless in his ability to say, you'll figure it out later. I don't want to waste words here. Let's just keep going. You'll catch up. And it's nice to treat the reader as capable of solving that puzzle, and not having to make them solve it immediately is just wonderful. I mean, that not to keep rambling on, but I love the series. But
ramble away. I mean, you're preaching to the choir here. So yeah.
But to have this world that is not, you know, a country or a continent, but it's, you know, many different continents, that feels alive, where it
Very
feels like
yeah.
he could drop me somewhere in the middle of nowhere and have a story to tell. And that when we leave an area, that you feel like the story is continuing, that you know that plot threads will become unresolved, because that's how life works, right? I mean, I leave people in my daily life to go do something else, and they're still living their lives. Where it feels like in so many fantasy stories, the only story really being told in that world is the one from that character's perspective.
Right.
And you know, it just blows my mind. There's a scene that I can't go into too much detail on, but you know, there's a critical moment in the characters' paths that take them from one continent to another, and we kind of leave a continent for a long time, and there's a plot thread that feels like it's the central plot thread to the story, happening in the capital, where we left, and I said, but that, I feel like we just solved the problem. Where is this story even taking me? And we're not going to deal with this character anymore. Wow, I've never felt this before, where the author is just taking me on this ride and letting the world just run its course. And it's just a magical feeling. And then to have somebody like Ian C. Esselmont to come in the back end and fill in some of those stories is wonderful. And to be able to have another author that, you know, that I love and continue on these stories that I care about and never got resolution to, is just so awesome that they're able to tag team this in such a brilliant way. It just speaks a lot to me.
Yeah, not all of the loose threads get tied up, but a lot of the ones that Erikson leaves, you will find resolution in some of the Esselmont books, which is fantastic. And I also love Esselmont as a storyteller. I will never stop singing his praises as well. One of the best atmospheric writers out there, I think. But yeah, it's an interesting thing you touched on there. And I think you're absolutely right about the place of an individual. And in most fantasy, you're going to have a hero or a protagonist main character or a group of characters
Mhm.
that are central, and we're following them, and probably they're going to save the world, and et cetera, et cetera. You know, that's kind of how it goes. What I said from the very beginning, my very first video on Malazan, which was more than 3 years ago now, probably, was that I've never read a fantasy series that so much gives me actually a more proper sense of my place in the universe.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times when you're identifying with the protagonist, you're feeling that character is super important, right? And in our day-to-day lives as individuals, we might go around feeling like, wow, I'm important. And, you know, that's our perspective, right?
Yep.
Because we have these egos. But the reality, you zoom out a bit and you realize, wow, I'm actually just kind of a little fellow after all. And in fact, I'm more or less a little mote of dust here on
Yep.
this planet, which is really kind of a very small planet. And we're going around this average sized star. And that star is one of billions of stars in this galaxy, which is one of millions and billions of galaxies and all that. So, and you realize, wow, I'm not actually as important as I think, you know.
Yeah.
And Malazan is the series that I feel like puts me in that frame of mind, somewhat like the idea of just looking up at the stars on a clear night and feeling this sense of awe and wonder. And it's not a necessarily negative thing where you're feeling, oh, I'm insignificant. Oh no, it's more like, oh, I'm actually a tiny part of something that is vast, something that is amazing and wonderful, and wonderful in the sense of being full of wonder, you know. That's what Malazan gives, I feel, better than any other series I know. And that is one of the reasons why it is my favorite of all time, because you have these layers and layers and layers of, I mean, it's cool when I think when any fantasy series gives you a sense of this past that is gone. And there are little tiny just glimpses of that past, you know, here and there, crumbling buildings out in the middle of nowhere or something like that. What Erikson and Esselmont give is a sense of history that goes back hundreds of thousands of years, not just thousands of years. And it's amazing, right? The layers. I think that there are a couple of key things here, both of them, their experience as archaeologists.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned the richness of the world. And I think a lot of that can be ascribed to their gaming it and having a full sense of the world that they created in this very organic way together. So yeah, just so much great stuff going for that series. Yeah.
Yeah. I love when a world feels like it's been there for a long time before I got to witness it.
Yeah.
And I mean, I remember reading the first book, and, you know, I'm not spoiling anything by saying, I mean, there's this race of character called the Tolanimas that shows up, and very quickly after they show up, there's this reference to their history being hundreds of thousands of years old. And I remember stumbling on that for a moment and my brain having to play some catch up and saying, you know, what? Like, what did I just read? And is there a typo? Because this doesn't feel like anything I've read before. And then you get these introductions to characters that are talking about things happening hundreds of thousands of years ago.
Yeah.
Because they experienced it. And it just fills the mind with wonder. And
yeah,
I wish I could find another series that captures that feeling again. And, you know, I found some that are scratching that itch a little bit, but I just hope someday I'll be able to find another one.
I do think in this sense, Malazan is unique. I don't know if anyone's ever going to be able to match that feat that Erikson and Esselmont have. I mean, there are certainly writers who have written some really grand, ambitious series that are loved by so many. You know, Wheel of Time, and Brandon Sanderson is working on the Stormlight Archives, and I'm reading one now that is amazing, and I think it's gonna I think you might want to look into, if you haven't started yet. It's Jenny Wirtz's Wars of Light and Shadow.
Yeah, that's on my plans for the next year.
Okay, good. So that is, I would say, in terms of complexity, right up there with Malazan. And very different writing style. Jenny Wirtz's writing style, her prose is very distinct. It is very, and it can sometimes take a little bit of adjusting, but once you get it, it's just so rich and so wonderful. I'm starting the fourth book soon in the Wars of Light and Shadow. So I have obviously I need to finish the series before I can completely, say, yeah, this is, give my firm assessment on it. But right now I'm feeling like, yeah, this could be right up there with Malazan. So yeah.
Yeah, the one I've read recently that made me feel a lot of the same things. It's very different, but was the is the second Apocalypse series.
Oh yes, R. Scott Baker. Yeah, I've read the first trilogy.
Yeah, I just finished the first one, and it certainly made me feel a lot of the same feelings.
Yeah, yeah. For me, I enjoyed it. By the way, R. Scott Baker, brilliant writer, just brilliant. But one key distinction I feel between what R. Scott Baker is doing and exploring and what Steven Erikson and Esselmont are doing, I do feel that you could probably label at least the Prince of Nothing grimdark, or it's very bleak. It's a very bleak series, and I'm told by people like Jimmy who have read the rest of the second Apocalypse series that it doesn't get less bleak, it probably gets more. And so I think that a key thing about Erikson and Esselmont's series, even though some people actually think Malazan Book of the Fallen is grimdark, I personally don't feel that way. I'm not going to get into an argument with anybody about it, but I personally do feel that it is not grimdark. And the distinction there is Erikson and Esselmont are keen to, I think there's an affirmative morality going on in their series, that they are exploring ideas like compassion. And there is an ultimate sense of connection that occurs. And that's one of the beautiful things about Malazan. One of the moments that really get my tears flowing are usually reunions, or when two people who hated each other finally suddenly make this very human connection, and they could be from different races entirely, but there's this understanding that leaps out. That's the sort of thing I think that they're exploring a lot. Whereas Baker, and by the way, this is not a bad thing. This is just, I think, the nature of what he's trying to explore and what he's trying to do and portray. It's just relentlessly bleak. It is much more exploring our failings as creatures, our selfishness, the consequences of patriarchy, and it's just a lot of abuse and sexual violence and violence of every type. Really, it's just a very tough world to be in. So I feel that that's a big difference between the two series. That Malazan, you have some hope, and there's a lot of horrible things that happen too, but there is a continuing return to hope and compassion and connection, whereas you don't get those things really much at all in Baker's writing. I don't know. Do you agree?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I've always summarized for simplicity's sake, when I think about what I define as grimdark, I think of how much hope is there in the world. And in Malazan, it's questioned, but it's constantly there. And I feel like a lot of people that say that it's grimdark, and I'm not going to tell people they're wrong. I think it's a subjective thing, but I think a lot of times they're looking at something that happens in the second book and remembering that moment and letting that either take over their feelings for the rest of the series, or kind of ignoring these other moments.
Yeah.
But the series is constantly reminding you, especially on the micro level with these characters, that there are good moments to be found in the world on a human connection level. And, mothers finding motherhood, and, friends reuniting, and in these great moments of happiness that sticks out in a world where many dark things are happening. And, it's just I find Malazan to be one of the things that I've never been able to find in the other series that is so special about it, is that it feels like hundreds of little short stories. And
Mm,
even though it's not separated like that, I mean, you have these stories that are, a chapter will have many point of views, but it just feels like we're constantly getting short stories. And so many of those are uplifting on a
yeah.
character level that I can't help but think back on the series with a very uplifting light,
Yeah.
especially with the way that everything that if when you finish the series, I can't help but think you would think anything other than um compassion is a residing theme of that story.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very well said. Yeah. And we both love the Crippled God the most. For me, it was just I reread it 2 years ago, 1 or 2 years ago. I can't remember exactly when. And I just it was probably some of the slowest reading I've done is the last 100 pages because I kept having to dry my eyes. I mean, it was just so moving. And the culmination, of course, its greatness does reside on the previous books,
Yeah.
including Dust of Dreams, of which it's really the second half in some ways, and which is ironic because a lot of people dislike Dust of Dreams so much. But the Crippled God wouldn't be what it is without Dust of Dreams, I think. So, but other than the fact that we both have the same one that we love the most, do you have an order or ranking or anything like that for the books, or are there any that you like less a little bit than the others, or?
um I definitely did not love Dust of Dreams when I read it. There's a particular storyline um involving um a snake that I did not uh
Yeah.
that
Okay. I love this storyline, but I think you're maybe in the majority on this.
it didn't resonate with me. It just left me kind of confused, and I
Uh-huh.
had to go do a lot of supplemental reading to find interest in
Did the
it.
supplemental reading change your perspective on it at all, or?
And a little bit. I
Okay.
need to reread it again with a knowing what it's all about.
Yeah.
Once it dawned on me what was happening, I was so far into the storyline that I need to go reread it again.
Yeah. Yeah.
And quite frankly, I didn't love the first book. I
Oh, okay.
I
Gardens of the Moon.
I suspect that I will when I reread it, but I was so confused,
Uh-huh.
and I just took everyone's advice, which I think is good advice, which is don't worry about it. Don't try to understand everything. Just move forward. And I didn't fall in love with the series until the second book.
Uh-huh.
But I don't know that I would have continued the series had I just picked it up off a bookshelf and read it. And outside of those two, it's a lot of close rankings. I mean,
Okay.
there are
Yeah.
so many different books in there. I mean, I'd say that the Toll the Hounds was not I was not loving it as much as many of the other books because of the change in tone.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Yeah.
I totally understand why it was written the way it was with what Erickson was going through at the time, which
Yeah.
I suspect would influence anybody's writing, and with the death of one of his parents,
His father. Yeah.
his father. But then I read the last couple hundred pages, which I think is my favorite thing that I've ever read.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
out in any book. And so I can't help but love that book
Yeah.
as I look back on it.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Total Hounds is unique, I think, in that series. And it is a unique book in a unique series, I think. And of course, he does something different with every book. But yeah, Toll the Hounds is, and I've said many times, to me, is one of the most profound explorations of how grief and love are so intertwined. And it was really cool. I had a chance to talk with AP Canavan, and I read the series. I reread the series along with AP, as you probably know. And
yeah,
we did get a chance to talk to Steven Erickson as well during one of our spoiler discussions on Toll the Hounds, and to hear him explain it was like, wow, yeah, it's a profoundly moving book. Yeah, so
it
yeah,
is. I mean, the thing that didn't work for me as well in that is when I find what my interest in is reading, is I loved the amount of philosophy that Erickson put into the stories,
Yeah,
and it definitely ramped up a lot in that one.
it
And
does. It does. Yeah.
the ratio got outweighed for me from an enjoyability factor, just on a personal level.
Yeah.
The same way that his Carcanis series is not
Just
my
thinking
favorite
that.
stuff,
Yeah.
because it has a lot of the same heavy usage of philosophy in it,
Right.
heavier than the other stuff that he's written.
So you
And
personally did not resonate as much with Carcanis as with the Malazan Book of the Fallen?
yeah, definitely. I mean, I'll read them, I'll like them, but
Yeah.
I don't know that I'll love them
Uh-huh.
like I will, even some of his other stuff, the like the most
Vocally the
recent
Corporal
one, The
Brooch.
Witness.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Quite frankly, like the Corporal Brooch stuff, which
yeah,
is
yeah.
silly and dark, and I love it. And
Oh, you
but
enjoy those? Okay, cool. Yeah.
oh, I more than enjoy them. I mean, I find them to be some of the more entertaining stuff I've ever read.
Yeah.
I, I don't know that I've ever laughed as hard as some moments in that series while truly heinous things are happening.
Yeah.
And it's just this crazy mix of horror and comedy that should not work together, but
Absurdism.
it
Yeah, yeah.
does.
It sounds like you do love Malazan humor. Yeah, yeah,
I do. I mean, I read when I was reading Malazan, and I got to these two characters that are very silly and roommates. Um, I I thought to myself, wow, this is fantasy humor is a thing, and I need more of it. And people told me, oh, if you like that, you need to go read Discworld. And I read Discworld and I liked it, but I came back looking at it and saying none of it really hit the same as the way Erickson writes his humor.
yeah,
I just can't understand how an author can write so many different styles
yeah.
and execute so well on them. I mean, how does a guy write the way he writes most of Malazan, somehow have a sense of humor, up there with the best of them? That doesn't make sense to me.
And yet it's so necessary, I think, for the series. You use the word uplifting, and I think the humor is makes a lot of that high tragedy tolerable, and it's also cathartic at times. There are certain moments, like in Deadhouse Gates, where they're going through something horrible, and there are these little moments of humor that you crack a smile, and somehow you're able to keep going. So
Yeah, I mean, and it's emblematic of real life. I mean, if you read
yep.
narrations from people going through the horrors of things like the World Wars
Yep.
and their first person perspectives, it was laced with humor amid horrific moments happening, because I think that's how the human mind tries to adjust to these moments.
Yep.
And so to see an author recognize that real life aspect to how humans deal with tragedy,
Right.
is very real.
Yeah. Well said. Very well said. I agree. Well, speaking of humor, are there other fantasy writers that you would consider? Because I agree with you, Erickson's sense of humor is brilliant, and I think that there is a thing called Malazan humor, because Esselmont has that too, and I feel like, anyway, I feel like they developed in some ways this humor together as they were gaming. I have never been able to ask them about that, but I suspect that there's a shared humor there that informs the series. But there are other fantasy writers who I do think are wonderful with their humor. Joe Abercrombie comes to mind, of
Yeah,
course. And you are our First Law fan, correct?
I am. I'm going through my reread of them right now.
Uh-huh.
And they're I can't help but smile in so many moments and laugh out loud at just the dialogue between these characters.
Yeah.
It's a hilarious series amid very dark moments.
Again, it's a series. I feel like the magic of that series is really the humor that makes it's a part of why we love those characters, even some of the more despicable ones. Without that humor, Abercrombie wouldn't be nearly as interesting, I feel.
Yeah,
big
Completely
part
agree.
of his success is his wonderful sense of humor. So yeah, others that come to mind for me, Scott Lynch, I think is pretty good with the witty stuff, and Mark Lawrence is another one, definitely for me, who really has a great sense of humor, very dry at times.
Yeah.
Are there others that come in mind for you in terms of
I
humor?
mean, he's not as well known, but I found that the series that J. Zachary Pike wrote, that I think a lot of people think of as Orconomics, but it's called The Dark Prophet,
Mm,
was satire at its best,
yeah.
and I had so many moments in all three of those books that made me just have to put the book down and tell my wife that everything's okay, because I'm just laughing it up in the corner of the room.
Oh, that's great. Orconomics, I of course have heard of. I have not read. Was that that's self-published?
It
Orconomics?
is, yeah. It
Yeah,
actually won one of the early SPFBO or
that's what I
SPFBO.
thought. Yeah,
Um, yeah,
yeah.
and then the final one of the trilogy just came out this year.
Oh, cool. Okay, I got to check that out. Yeah, I'm getting. This year I'm a judge for SPFBO
Mhm.
9, which has been a very enriching experience, and I've so enjoyed becoming more and more plugged into the self-publishing fantasy community, and SPFBO is a great way. You don't have to be a judge, even you can just be following along and supporting the authors, and reading along. We have our 10 finalists now.
Yep.
I'm really excited about the one that I put forward, and all of the others as well. I'm excited to read them all, but I put forward one called Murder at Spindle Manor.
Yep.
By Morgan Stang, and I think it's quirky, it's different, it's steampunk, but Agatha Christie thrown in there. And speaking of humor, great humor. I actually laughed so hard at a couple of points in that in that book, and it's I just knew I was reading something great while I was reading it the whole time.
Yeah, it's sitting on my Kindle at the moment.
Oh, cool.
I so
Yeah.
I got, without saying any names, but I was invited to be on a team to judge SPFBO, and then I
Oh.
very quickly was removed, because uh, my reviews can be a little negative at times, and
Oh.
I think the perception was like these are indie authors, maybe let's not be as harsh on them, and which is
Yeah.
fine.
Hmm.
But I'm into it now, and I want to read all the finalists,
Okay.
because now
Cool.
I got my brain kind of invested in, yeah, I want to check out these authors, and it's
Yeah.
what it's made me do is buy books for the first time. So I'm a couple years back, I stopped buying books because I was spending thousands of dollars a year, and so I just use the library
I've done that too.
exclusively.
Yeah.
I've kind of found a nice thing about living in California is that all libraries are accessible to every Californian.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, but you have to physically go. And so just whenever I go on vacation anywhere, I always go to the library and get a card.
Oh,
And so I've got like 20 library cards. And
wow.
because I have a Kindle, every book that I want is available. And
Awesome.
but not the SPFBO ones, because they're not popular enough. And
Yeah.
so I went and bought 10 books, which is first time I've done that in a long time.
That's awesome. Yeah. Let's circle back to that idea, if you don't mind, a little bit about reviewing. And on the one hand, I feel like there are two sides to this, at least two sides to this idea that we ought to be gentler with self-published books, or we ought to have different standards. That can, in itself, I could see one perspective being that is in itself sort of patronizing and insulting, you could say, to self-published books, to say, no, you have to be, different. You have to be nicer to them, because that implies right away that they're not as good, doesn't it? If you're saying, or what's the motivation there for saying we need different standards for self-published versus traditionally published books when reviewing? Can you understand that side of it at all? Or
Well,
I obviously they have, they don't have the access to the editorial help and other things, then they're paying out of their own pocket for whatever editing they can get, which is very expensive. But what are your thoughts on that? Should we treat them the same, or should we have different standards?
I mean, I'm biased. I think we should treat them the same for a lot of reasons. I believe strongly that outside of just writing, you're never going to get better at something without failing.
That's for
And
sure. Yeah.
Failing is part of progress. It's a very important part of progress. And not to claim that when I don't like a book, it failed, but it's failed for me. And I will always have criticisms that are rectifiable. And so I believe that authors should welcome criticism. And I think basically they all do on the author level. I mean, I've asked many authors as I started getting into booktubing about this idea that, look, if you want me to review your book, great, but note that I might hate it.
Right.
And I'm not going to lie about that. And all of them have said, please do. Please tell me your thoughts. I need it.
And I know that's true because you just reviewed my book.
Yeah.
And you were upfront with me the whole time. You're like, look, if I'm going to be honest. And I was like, please, yep, please do, because I value that as well. And so, yeah, I appreciate that actually very much.
Yeah. I mean, in my issue specifically, I did review one book where I was arguably overly harsh. And I don't want to say what it is, so I don't, put a target on it, but I viewed the book as plagiarizing another book.
Okay. That's derivative, in other words.
More than a lot. And well, scene for scene, it felt like I was reading the same book. And the author outwardly claimed that book was their inspiration, but it went too far. And so in my review, in a kind of joking fashion, pulled out a list of all the similarities. And I spoke for like 10 minutes on the similarities.
Okay.
And and so I, in my mind, called out something that I felt like wasn't being called out.
Okay. So you were proving a point there.
But it wasn't a self-published book. It was a Tor book.
Oh, so it's not self-published. Okay.
No, but it was just, I think my review in general struck a very negative tone. But in general, I find that self-published books can be every bit as good as published books. There's not some criteria that you must be amazing to be published and that you must be bad to be unpublished. A lot of authors make the choice to be self-published. A lot of them don't. A lot of them can't get published because that's difficult, but many can. And
most cannot. Yes.
But I definitely think that in general, in reviewing, just outside of books, people should be able to both trust the reviewer's opinion, which is very important to me, that my viewers know that I'm being honest.
Right.
And that it benefits the authors.
Yeah. Yeah. I try myself to keep my criticism constructive when I'm reviewing a book. I pretend that I'm talking to an author so that I don't say anything I wouldn't say if the person weren't actually there in front of me. But yeah, you do need to say, there are aspects of this that do stick out that I feel could be improved on. And that, as an author, I put on my author hat and I think, wow, thank you, thank you, because that's helpful to me. And I will consider that, you don't always hear consistent, like sometimes somebody will say, I love this aspect of your writing. And another person will say, I hate this aspect of your writing. And you have to think, but sometimes you do hear the same sort of criticism again and again and again. And that's when you start thinking, I probably should address this the next time I write a book. I should do this a little differently. And that's really valuable. So I don't know. I have mixed feelings about whether or not we should be different when we approach self-published books versus traditional. Part of me wants to think why, because as you just said, and I agree, self-published books can be every bit as good as traditional. You will find self-published writers who are, in my opinion, writing better, more engaging stories than many traditionally published stories. And so, the idea that we ought to have separate, the real deal and then the kiddie version for self-published is insulting in a way,
Yeah.
So I can see that perspective.
It is. I will say on the flip side, though, if I were to go read a Brandon Sanderson book,
right,
and hate it, there is no chance that Brandon Sanderson will ever realize that I did that. And I don't want to pretend that that's the case.
Right.
It will not hurt him in the slightest, nor will he care. And
so
nor,
there's the
nor
counter argument. Yeah.
If I go review a book with 10 reviews, they're guaranteed going to realize what I wrote. And, it could hurt their feelings, which I never want to do. I mean, I want to put good feelings in people. But I mean, that certainly is a factor, I think.
So here's what you can do. And this is what by the way, I have done myself a couple times. When I read a self-published book and I feel like, and especially if it doesn't have many reviews or anything like that, and I feel like I would have more negative than positive things to say, I just don't review it. I just say, okay, I don't want to hurt this person because they have 10 reviews right now and a certain number of people might listen to what I have to say. I don't want to hurt this person, so I'm just going to leave it alone. But if I do decide to review a self-published book, I need to be honest about it. So that's been my kind of, I guess, how I've tried to handle that, because you're absolutely right. A review matters a lot more to a self-published author typically than to a traditionally published one, because the self-published author is doing whatever they can to get the marketing done, and they just have a lot less ability to do that in most cases. So.
Yeah, I mean, I've thought about doing that. I've ended up signing on the idea that, if I'm putting in the effort to read it, I want to review it.
Yeah.
And I have a very OCD part of my brain that almost compels me to review something when I've read it.
Yeah.
I just feel completed in it. But I end up siding on the idea that if a book is tiny and my negative review could really negatively impact it, I just won't read it. Which is not great, for some people, because I'm missing out on a lot of gems.
Yeah.
But I remember early on in booktubing, and authors started offering to send me books, and I thought, wow, this is amazing. Somebody's offering to send me a book, and now I realize that that's it's a marketing thing, and a lot of people do that.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
But I remember reading a book that I thought was truly horrendous. And at that time I said, that's when I made my decision to stop reading tiny books. But instead of reviewing it, I wrote them a letter that said, look, here are my thoughts. I didn't love it. Here's why. A very long, critique.
That's valuable. Yeah.
And I said, you might find value in this, but I'm not going to publish this. And that's when I kind of made my decision to only review things I felt like people could handle if I didn't like it.
Yeah. That's wise, I think. And, it's valuable that you even went to the trouble to do that, I think. And as an author, it is hard to hear criticism, even constructive sometimes of your work. But I think if you want to be better, you need to be, it's a weird combination of being proud and being humble. And you need to hear criticism. You need to hear people who give you feedback. And the act of offering feedback is a valuable thing. So, but yeah.
I mean, I think about my career, and knowing that many of the lessons that I've learned in my career have been learned through being criticized, not in a tearing me down kind of way,
right?
But in a, here's how you should improve from my bosses, that there's no way I'd be successful in my career had I not learned those lessons early on.
Right. Yeah. I think that's fair. Yeah. So it's tricky sometimes being a reviewer. And we do this out of passion, right? We don't
Yeah.
make much money from doing this.
Right.
This is a passion project. So, that's something for authors to keep in mind as well. I think is that the people who are doing this typically are doing it because they love what you're trying to do, and if they're offering feedback, the vast majority of the time it's sincere and they're trying to be helpful. So yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Yeah, it's an interesting space to occupy, I think, the reviewer space at times, especially if you're also someone, and I think I'm venturing to guess a majority of people who are booktubers are also at least interested in writing themselves. I suspect that a majority have maybe even a book in a drawer somewhere or on a hard drive or whatever, that they're thinking about it at the very least. Is that the case for you? Are you interested in writing, or have you actually tried to yet?
No, I'm definitely in that minority group where I don't like writing.
Oh,
I just
yeah.
I find no I find no interest in it, and I don't particularly think that I would ever be interested in enough to be even okay at it. I mean, I write a lot for my job, but I write, I write a very different style of writing. I write press releases. I write, you know, opinion pieces about policy and things that are nothing in this realm but I don't like to do it. It's the least fun part of my job. And so, and I'm just not creative enough. I want you to tell me a story. I don't want to pretend that I can make up my own. I mean, the extent of my storytelling capabilities are making up little stories for my kids, but
which is fun.
But I remain eternally impressed by the imagination that authors have, and I constantly think through it, being impressed by this simultaneous feeling of I could never do that, and you're at a level of expertise that is just impressive, and I'll never pretend that I'll be a fraction of that. It's like watching a sports event where I watch my favorite tennis player or something, and part of the fun of that for me is saying, wow, that you've perfected this craft that I would never within a million years get within a close distance of. And so that's kind of where I land on that spectrum.
Yeah. Are you a tennis fan?
I am. I played competitive tennis my whole life.
Same. Well, I'm a tennis player too and fan. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I love tennis.
Oh, how cool. All right.
But yeah, but I love watching tennis, and
yeah,
it just so impresses me, the skill gap.
Oh yeah. So I play 3 days a week myself. And for an amateur, kind of competitive. But the reality is when I watch the pros, both the men's side and the women's side, doesn't matter. There are people there doing things that I know I cannot do. And I love it when I hear amateur players say stuff like, oh, I could beat this player or that player, or I would be, no, I'm sorry. You would not score a single point against that pro. You would not have a chance at winning a game, let alone a set, and it sometimes astounds me how little people actually know about their own skill levels. But you see all the time with tennis for some reason. But yeah, I mean, it's
yeah. I mean, I will say to their benefit, watching tennis on TV, I will constantly say to myself, like, oh, it doesn't look like they're going that fast.
Yeah.
And
go to a live event though, and watch, and you will realize, oh, I could never get that ball back.
Yeah, you watch what 130 mile per hour serve looks like.
Yeah.
Hitting the tee, and you'd miss it by 5 feet.
You won't get close to it. You won't touch that serve. I mean, I'd love to think that I could get back an Andy Roddick serve, but no, I couldn't. No way. Yeah.
Yeah. No. I mean, I guess the mathematically, maybe if you just randomly stuck your rocket out somewhere, you'd get lucky. But certainly,
maybe 1 in 1,000 or something. Yeah. Yeah, maybe 1 in 100 I could get my racket on, and then out of those, maybe 1 out of 1,000 would get into the, in the court,
Yeah.
So, yeah, yeah, but it's fun. I love tennis as well. So I didn't realize you were a fellow tennis person. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
no, it's my way to keep healthy.
Wow, same here. I mean, we'll have, if we ever get a chance to get together, we'll have to bring our rackets.
Indeed.
Yeah, awesome. So what are some of the other, we talked about Malazan, we talked a little bit about First Law. What are, and you think that Baker's writing is going to possibly reach that upper echelon for you? What are some of the other, I see some Robin Hobb behind you there. How do you feel about the Realm of the Elderlings?
It's solidly a top 5 series for me. It
Cool.
is some of, if not the best character writing that I've ever read. It blows my mind how an author could write a series that seems like it's wrapped up. Maybe it's not. And I've heard her mention before she might want to continue writing about one of the characters in the story.
Interesting.
But just the idea that she could write a story that she thought was done and then wrote more and somehow made it feel like it was all planned along the whole time, is very mind-boggling to me. I don't understand how that was done. I mean, reading that last book and that last trilogy in particular brings everything back home that we've read and through the entire series.
Which by the way, I'm starting this month. Fits in the Fool. I'm reading it for the first time this month. Yeah.
But I mean, you read that, if you didn't know it, you'd feel like she plotted this all out before she wrote the first book. And
which she did not. Yeah.
Know that that's not the case is crazy. But yeah, her writing to me is the way that she writes, Fitz in particular, is a really incredible experience. I mean, being able to go through life with the character is a feeling I've never felt before, where you get to experience this character as a little boy and you end up reading till they're a grown adult. And it's one of those series where I was very sad when I finished it.
Oh, I'm sure.
Because I feel like I'm, a friend of mine is gone that I'm not going to be around with anymore. Because the story's done. And so yeah, I'm a huge Robin Hobb fan. And a series I read recently, which is in that very, very top tier, was the Dandelion Dynasty.
Yes,
Ken Liu.
Yeah, Ken Liu. I have to read that. That's on my wish list for next year.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably my second favorite series I've ever read.
Wow.
I mean, I'm a big history fan. Before I read fantasy, I was reading a lot of history, and I've always had a very strong passion for it.
Same here.
So to read a book that is very much a history book with fantasy elements is a great blend that doesn't work for everybody. And I think a lot of people will hate the series because of the dryness that a history book often has.
It sounds like I will love it though, because
but it definitely spoke to me in a very powerful way.
Cool. I want to make a recommendation for you if you haven't read it yet, because of the way you praised Robin Hobb's Realm of the Elderlings. It makes me think you might also enjoy The Long Price Quartet by Daniel Abraham.
Yeah, it's on my TBR. I want to get to it next year. Cool. And I feel like the people that my opinions line up with a lot keep telling me that I need to read it, which is a good sign.
Yeah, but what you were talking about with emerging with the sense of a life lived, a whole life from like youth to old age, Long Price Quartet, and it does it in 4 pretty short books, like way shorter. That's the difference. You do emerge feeling in a similar way I feel about the characters, the richness, the relationships between them, capturing the full complexity and psychology of a human being. But Abraham somehow does it in a much shorter space than you would even think is possible. So I would be curious to hear what you think about that one. When you read the first book, you might think like, where's the action? What's going on here? What, it's very much you're being steeped in these characters, and that is the value of that read. Not a lot. Like if I were to just describe to you the bare plot, it wouldn't take very long.
Yeah,
Not a lot of action, just to get as a heads up for that. But yeah, just an amazing. I think he does a brilliant job of capturing a life. Yeah,
that's great to hear. Yeah, no, I look forward to it.
cool. So what else? What do you besides LPQ? What are other things that you're looking forward to delving into, perhaps, in as series you're getting into or continuing?
I'm reading a lot of series at the moment. I'd say that the few books that are making me most excited to continue the series, because I do this reading style where I like to gap my books in a series by 2 or 3 months to avoid burnout of those series.
Same here.
And to keep my viewers interested. I don't think people want to see me review a 16-book series back to back to back to back.
Yeah.
Nor do I really want to read like that. And so, but the ones that I'm really excited about are the Ryan Cahill series, the
Down in the Broken. Yeah.
Down in the Broken. I'm just in love with this writing style and the story going on there.
I've read again next year. I want to read that. Yeah.
I suspect you're gonna fall in love with it. From knowing your feelings on classic fantasy.
Yeah.
It does a very beautiful blend of classic themes with a modern storytelling. And it works so well.
I've heard people, and I haven't read his books yet, so I can't say, but I have heard people comparing my books to his in that sense, at least. That blend that you're talking about. So.
Yeah, and one of my things I mentioned in my review of yours was that blend, and I love that. I'm a little bit more rare in that I almost never love books that are this old style and the classic stories. I feel like I'm on my lonesome where I don't love Lord of the Rings. I feel like I'm like the only person in the.
Jeez, we were getting along so well, man.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's so.
No, that's fine.
It's so dated for me when what I love is the more modern devices. And I didn't read Lord of the Rings until recently, and after I read many more modern takes on fantasy.
Right.
And so, but I do love when they blend it, and and that's one of the reasons your book that I ended up with a very positive impression of it. But yeah, Ryan Cahill's books are wonderful. And on the totally different end of the spectrum from anything we've talked about is The Wandering Inn.
Tell me about that, because all I know is that it was serialized online. So
it's a book written by an anonymous author that I had the pleasure of interviewing recently, which was a fun experience.
And you just, when you interview that person, I guess you're not seeing their face. You're not.
So what we did was we did a written interview, and then acted out by their audiobook narrator.
Okay, wow! Because this person has preserved their identity completely.
They have. They're very, very careful from a safety perspective on never wanting their identity to be known. And has heard stories of people being stalked and these negative things about having a public persona, and wants to preserve anonymity, which I think is an admirable thing if that's what you're going for. But it's the longest fantasy series ever written. It's at its current stage, I think, like 4 times the size of the Wheel of Time.
Oh, good grief! Wow.
And being written at a blistering pace. I mean, I
might not live to finish it.
So I'm reading right now 3 or 4 of the books a year, and they're like 1,000 pages or so. And I'm losing ground.
Oh no, are you serious?
Yeah. I mean, the author writes as a full-time job, writes thousands of words a day,
Good
um,
Lord. Wow.
and has 2 chapters a week that come out that take an hour plus to read each.
Huh.
And so it's so fun, and it's
Wow.
this lit RPG
But you're going to be 80
progression
years
thing.
old, but it's assuming that the author is not still writing, then uh,
Yeah,
you're going to be old when you finish this,
I
right?
am. I've lost hope that I'll ever catch up. But I'm just having so much fun, and it's
Huh.
just such an amazing world building experience where, because there's so much words in this story, that it
Yeah.
really explores this world. I mean, you get,
Wow.
many chapters from different continents that slowly start to bring themselves together. And by slow, I mean very slow. I mean, I'm just now realizing, I think, what the greater story is going towards, and it's already more. I've already read more words than Robert Jordan ever wrote in the Wheel of Time, and
Oh,
the story's just finally starting to show me the greater sense of things. But yeah, I'm in love with it, and it's almost like a guilty pleasure, because it's not like the peak of literary reading, but it
okay.
is the peak of fun. And
So you wouldn't compare it to Robin Hobb or Stephen Erickson or something like that.
no, in part because the author doesn't edit. I mean, the author writes live,
Okay.
on their on they pull up a notepad on Google Docs,
Okay.
and for their Patreon members just writes, and you
Oh
can see
wow.
the writing happen.
That is quite
And
a feat because on it, I would never want anyone to see my first draft of anything.
yeah, I mean, it's very fun. I've heard it explained, but it's almost like an old feeling of sitting around a campfire watching somebody tell a story to you.
That's
And
crazy.
because
Wow.
you'll have hundreds of people watching it in real time and chiming in and saying, oh, there's a grammatical problem, and you'll see them go back and fix it.
That's
Um,
wild. How would you even write that fast? Huh.
it's crazy. But it all works. It's clearly an obsession for them, and
Yeah.
they're enormously successful.
Great.
I mean, they're making a lot of money off just their Patreon alone.
Huh. Huh.
Is They've made a very solid career out of it. But
Good
yeah,
for
it's a
them.
very, very fun experience.
Wow. And
So
I suppose too that there's a community of people around it that you get to feel like you're part of something as you're witnessing it emerge, you know?
it is. It's a very dedicated group of readers. Where,
Uh-huh.
I mean, I randomly read the first one without knowing there was a community behind it,
Uh-huh.
and it's still my most watched review because of how much their readers are into that series.
Wow. Okay, so
You
are
know,
we talking like manga levels of dedication or or readership? How big is this thing?
um, I mean, I don't know how many. I mean, there's many hundreds of Patreon members
Okay.
that are
Okay.
paying good money to read the chapters ahead of time.
Wow.
You go into the Discord channel, and there's thousands of people online
Wow.
talking about the series.
Huh.
And so it's not the most popular series out there, but it has
Right.
a maybe the most rabid fan base.
That's
Um,
amazing. And now the other novels that are serialized online, they don't all work that way, do they? Where the people are participating as the author writes. Is that
no, that's the only one that I know of. I mean, I read
okay?
some other online type stuff, not a lot.
Yeah.
A lot of the quality is not great.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
but this is the only one I've ever heard of where the authors has the ability to do that.
That amazes me. That amazes me because I'm somebody who when I write, I go over what I wrote a dozen, 20 times before I would even want anyone to see it. So
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, that amazes me.
yeah,
Wow.
it's crazy. I mean, a lot of people have said like, oh, it must be some AI, but you can literally see the person writing it live,
Uh-huh.
um,
Huh.
and see the growth of the author over time is
I would
is fun.
imagine. I would imagine that, yeah, I could see someone getting better and better at it. Still amazes me that someone could do that. Wow. That's really cool. Thanks for telling me. And
Of
it's
course.
obviously it's fantasy. There's magic. There's
Yeah, I mean it's a story of these young adults in their early 20s that as the book opens, you find that they've found themselves in a Dungeons and Dragons type world where they're
okay.
from our world. They are stuck.
So Portal fantasy then?
Yeah, I think, although I don't know definitely what the definition is, but I've heard that said. But
Okay.
they're over there, and there's there's creatures with classes and skill points, and one of the characters that wandering in premise is that this character finds an abandoned inn and says, I'm going to open that inn and try to start the life of an innkeeper.
Okay.
And as they go to sleep for the first night, they get this notification of, innkeeper class assigned, skill level 3. And they wake up saying, what was that? And trying to make sense of it along with the reader. And, but it doesn't take the forefront of the story, but it has this really fun video gamey feel to the background of it.
It's not it's not LitRPG though. It's not.
It definitely is, but it's light. Yeah, it is. But it's kind of lighter on the elements of it. I mean, you're not going to see like +3 strength and things along that nature, but you will see like, this skill assigned, and now they all of a sudden have this power they didn't realize they had before.
Okay, so you just changed my whole conception of it. So it's LitRPG. Okay,
Yep.
cool. All right. So that makes it even more amazing though in a way, because is it okay? So is it like a choose your own adventure thing there, where if you make one decision as a reader, how does that happen though? I mean, are there different paths you can go as a reader in this thing?
Nope, it's all chronological.
Oh, okay, it is. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Wow, it's kind of blowing my mind here.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of I started reviewing it. I feel like I was the only person that had in the booktubing community that read it and reviewed it.
I think Petrick has talked about it.
Petrick's talking about it.
Yeah.
I know Captured in Words is reading it.
Okay. Yep. So Jay's reading it. Okay.
Yeah, Jay's reading it. I know that there's a few others. The Shades of Orange is reading it.
Okay. Yeah.
I know Andrew's Wizardly Reads is obsessed with it now.
Oh, Andrew is. Okay, cool. I can't keep up with Andrew.
Yeah, he's hooked, and he's like, I'm reading this whole thing. I'm catching up as fast as I can.
Oh, he's gonna read the whole thing.
Yeah, he's committed. Like, I'm gonna fly through this.
All right.
And so, but yeah, it's starting to catch on a little bit. But it's it's a really fun escapist book for me. I can't read too many of them at a time, but it's nice to. I find that I oftentimes like to read something a little more lighthearted in between these denser, darker fantasy reads that I find myself gravitating towards.
Yeah. Cool. Wow. Thanks for indulging me and telling me all about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't have time to start reading it, unfortunately, but I'll keep it in mind. Maybe, of course, I better start if I want to even get very far in it, because I've only got another maybe 30, who knows, 50 years of reading if I'm lucky.
Well, something nice about the web serial format, because everything's on the website for free. They make ebooks. That's what I read because I love reading on a Kindle.
Yeah.
That are really inexpensive. It's like $3.99 for like 1,000 to 2,000 page book. But when you have these web serials, they all tell these little stories in a chapter where you can read a chapter that has a beginning, middle, and end. And know that you're never going to get a chapter with a cliffhanger. You're never going to get a chapter that left you wanting. You can pick it up and read a chapter and feel, like, oh, I can put this down for a while now.
I could get a taste for it, in other words. Yeah. Like a Dresden Files book, in the early ones anyway, I could pick up a Dresden Files and use it for a palate cleanser and feel like, yeah, that's great. I don't have to go back to the next book right away. Right. Okay, cool. Good to know. All right. That was a good sales pitch right there. All right. Wow. Any other series or breeds that you want to talk about that you're excited about before I pivot?
Let me think. Let me pull up my old. So I have a big reading
Oh, you
spreadsheet
are
that
so organized. I love it.
yeah, I feel like I have to be to keep my brain right. When I read so many books, I have to kind of document them as I read them. Otherwise, I'll be struggling.
Stupid.
Oh, I will say that I've been thoroughly engrossed with the Sun Eater series by Christopher Rocchio.
Oh, Rockio, I have to pick that up. Yeah, yeah,
It's uh he's one of the most skilled writers
yeah.
that I've ever read, and for
That's
a
gonna be
young guy,
my next sci-fi read is gonna be Sun Eater. Yeah.
yeah, it's in it. I'd say it's a really nice. I'm not as big of a sci-fi guy. I
Right.
read them, I like them, but my average rating for a sci-fi book is lower than a fantasy book.
Oh, interesting.
And
Okay. Yeah.
but it's sci fantasy where
Yeah.
it's got a lot of fantasy elements to it, and the
Right.
structure of the book is more like a fantasy book with a lot of harder science aspects to it.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
the prose is for me really really speaks to me,
Cool.
and makes me think about these greater themes in the world.
Cool. So kind of like Dune or Star Wars or something along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'd say Dune's a good one where, Dune is classified as a sci-fi book,
Right.
I think technically,
It
but
is, but it's got such fantasy tropes and archetypes in it. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, you've got, sand monsters sitting
Yeah.
around where you wouldn't expect that in a book with, spaceships and blasters.
Yeah. You never know, I guess. Yeah. That is so cool. Awesome. Yeah, that's one I want to pick up as well. The Sun Eater for sure. I hear great things. I'm very intrigued. So, well, I have taken a fair amount of your time, Matt. I really appreciate you sharing your time with me, and it's been wonderful getting to talk to you like this. I really enjoy meeting my fellow booktubers and getting a sense of where they're coming from. What do you see happening for your channel in the future? Where would you like to go? Anything exciting? Any plans? Because you got a lot of cool stuff going on. You've got your Discord. You have these exciting read-alongs happening all the time. I feel like in this way you remind me a lot of Mike from Mike's book reviews. You've got, and that maybe is part of the secret to your success as well, and his, I think, very well run, very tightly run ship, I think, and that really shows in so many respects. Like there's almost like a professional level that I think probably your viewers really appreciate. So what's in store for your channel?
I mean, really more of the same. I feel like I'm at a point where I've really hit the formula that I want to do. I mean, I don't do the channel to be successful or to make money.
Good thing, because we don't make much money doing this. Yeah.
I mean, it's a lot bigger than I thought it would be. I had this idea that, I've been doing this for like a year and a half. I kind of felt like my goal for the first year or so was, let's try to get like 1,000 subscribers. And so it's gotten bigger than I hoped it would.
Right.
But I also, just want to do more of the same thing and because I'm doing this channel selfishly. I don't do it because I think people want it. I do it because I want it. And I think that's how hobbies should be. And it's not a job. And I wanted a way to talk about the books I'm reading with people. And because I don't always read brand new books. And if I'm going to go read a book 15 years old, there's no space for me to enjoy it with other people.
Yeah.
And so I started the channel so I could selfishly talk about the things I love and be able to engage with people. And so, I find that I think my goals for the future moving forward is just keep reviewing every book that I read, make videos outside of that as I'm passionate about them, but with no expectation of them. Just if something speaks to me, then I'll do it. But if not, then I'll stick to reviews. That's my bread and butter. And
good.
The reviews are really easy because I don't edit them. I just record and then
go. Wow.
My editing takes 10 minutes or so to kind of clean up put in a couple pictures and you know, rendering takes longer than the editing.
Yep.
And so you know, it's fun. And so I want to keep having fun. Part of that fun has been the community aspect. I mean, I really push my Discord on people because I want to engage with people on a regular basis.
Yep.
And
you have over 2,000 people in there, right?
I do. You know, I started the Discord, I don't know, 6 months ago or so, maybe a little more. You know, it's kind of hit the, I think most of my viewers have heard about it now. So I'm not like getting a huge influx of people because there's no new way to advertise it. But I want people to come and talk with me and being able to engage. You know, I want to keep doing fun stuff. You know, I do a raffle where people put books in and I pick which one, and you know, I vote on which book I should read. I've been doing this really fun contest where I because I'm so regimented in what I read and I read the same amount every day. I know what books I'm going to read each month. You know, down to a very, you know, it just the spreadsheet tells me how much I'm going to read, and
that's a tight, like I said, tight ship, tightly run ship. Yeah.
But I do this contest where I put out the books I'm going to read, and you vote on what you think I'm going to rate them all.
Oh wow.
And,
yeah.
You know, so I've got hundreds of people that are voting, and then I put up, it's like a fantasy football, but for my channel. And so I keep the scores updated on where you are in the rankings. And then if you win a couple times or get in the top 3, then you get to pick a book for me to review. And so we're getting a lot of recommendations that way. And so I just want to create a sense of community and have a good time. And
it sounds like you are succeeding in that. It really does. Yeah.
But I definitely don't have this greater goal in mind.
Okay. Other than grand visions or anything like that. Yeah.
No, I mean, I'm never going to make a channel that's going to be huge. I mean, my growth is linear. You know, I will continue to grow the same amount of subscribers every month because I'm doing the same formula. And so it's, if you look at my stats for the past year, you know, I have about the same amount of subs every month for the last year, and it's not
that's
growing or shrinking. It's just the same thing. And so if I just want to have a good time, and so I think I've hit the formula that makes me maximize my enjoyment. So I don't want to upset it.
Fantastic. I think that's a great place to be. That's a great place to be. And I do encourage people to check it out. Thank you so much for your time, Matt. This has been a lot of fun. I love geeking out with my fellow book lovers and fantasy lovers. You've got a great thing going. I congratulate you on all your success, and I wish you much, much more as well. And as you continue to be a wonderful presence here on BookTube. So
thank you. And I mean, before we wrap up, I just want to tell you that, like, before I started my BookTube channel, I did it with a lot of intention. I had a thing I wanted to do, but there was a few people that motivated me without them knowing it for me to start a channel, and you were one of those few. Okay. You know, I said, like, you know, I'm never going to be able to review books like Philip because you do it in a very different way than me, and you approach things from something that I think is you bring a lot of value to the space because you do things very differently than I think most reviewers, and you bring that variety into it. But you definitely were one of those few people that I thought, yeah, you know, I want to kind of be like that guy. And so anyways, thank you for unknowingly helping me out and giving me a nudge that you didn't realize you were giving me.
Oh, I'm just, thank you for those kind words. That means a lot to me. I appreciate it a lot. So I feel very lucky to have this space, to be part of this community, to be talking to people like yourself, you know, wonderful people who love to read and talk about the books, because in talking about the books, I think, deepen our appreciation and understanding of these stories so much more. And that's why we're all here. And so it's great. So I appreciate your kind words very much. So with that, everybody, thank you so much for watching. Check out Matt's channel. There'll be a link in the description, and until next time.